first, let's talk about ending hunger. You know, I was inspired last week, and if you haven't watched yet, please watch the conversation with the great Vijay Prashad, where he spoke about the context of defund the police, the racist history of America, the class context, and the very simple notion that we use policing, in his terminology, to get in between people and food, the basic necessities of life. And I want to bring back this very, very simple and core concept. We should have a global campaign in the United States and every corner of the world to completely get rid of every single form of hunger. Let's do that. Let's have that very, very clear, very, very basic and human and universal goal for every single human on this planet. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I could tell you as someone, and again, I'll be very, very clear here, infinitely more sort of safe and privileged than most. But my family did experience at times some forms of food insecurity. And even those most mild things where it was never really, really going to be an issue, maybe a missed meal here, a missed meal there, the anxiety, the pain of that, the depth of that is something that absolutely no one should experience. And of course, many, many human beings do. In fact, the numbers have been increasing. There's an estimated 775 million undernourished people in 2014. By 2008, that estimate had increased to 820 million. Hunger is on the rise. The UN estimates that the COVID crisis will lead to an additional 83 to 132 million undernourished people. UN agencies have also made the argument that the international poverty threshold of $1.90 a day is not enough to afford a healthy diet. 3 million people cannot afford a healthy diet, according to the UN. This is very important, actually, that figure. That's the figure that the World Bank and others with a kind of Panglossian view have deployed to downplay the significance, the resilience, and the absolute massive burden of the amount of deeply impoverished and hungry people across this planet. And of course, this problem is not in any way exclusive to the underdeveloped world. Let's look at the United States, a world leader in inequality and poverty, even as it is the world's main superpower. The money goes to the weapons and out of the mouths of the poor. 37 million people struggle with hunger. 11 million of those are children. It's estimated that 40.4 million Americans are on SNAP. And of course, the Trump administration and its Republican allies have been waging a vicious, no other word could be used other than evil war to try to cut food stamps and SNAP benefits from the beginning of this administration. And that, of course, has not changed during the COVID pandemic depression that the Trump administration facilitated through its grotesque incompetence, along with 6.9 million women and children assisted by the WIC program. But even those with access to these programs, many communities in the United States struggle to stock healthy and affordable food. We know the systems of food deserts and the general undernourishment of all poor populations and many working populations across this country. In last year, Donald Trump proposed a cut to SNAP that would cut nearly 700,000 people off of the program. Court challenges in the COVID crisis have stopped the proposal from going into effect, but as I said before, the Trump 2021 budget suggests more cuts to the program, including cutting the budget of SNAP by over $180 billion. That's nearly 30% of the budget over the coming decade. Now, there's also a cash crop disaster. We produce enough food to provide everyone with a healthy diet, but our economic system will always, of course, prioritize profit over people. Globalization has drastically affected the food market. Most consequentially, something called cash cropping. African farmers have been encouraged to grow coffee, sugar, cocoa beans, tea, and cotton, and to use the money they've earned to buy food, and all in the process of driving down systems of resiliency, sustainability, and self-sufficiency. This has led to the underproduction of traditional staples and higher prices for those, even as pushes for things like value-added taxes in countries like Kenya, the most regressive and poor and working targeted form of taxation. Let's watch this clip of former Brazilian president, who of course we greatly admire and advocated for when he was a political prisoner on the show, Lula da Silva, speaking to Oxfam on the core need of getting rid of hunger several years ago.
Cabe a cada estado a responsabilidade da segurança alimentar do seu povo, garantindo a produção de alimentos ou a renda para que cada família possa adquirir o que comer. Essa é a condição básica para a paz, a democracia e a cidadania. Não existe conquista mais importante para uma sociedade do que poder tomar café de manhã, almoçar e jantar. Portanto, essa luta é de todos. Primeiro, de cada governo, que tem que assumir as suas responsabilidades. Depois, dos países mais ricos, que tem que ajudar no desenvolvimento dos países mais pobres. E de toda a sociedade, colocando em prática a solidariedade a de que todo ser humano é capaz. Por isso, eu apoio a campanha Cresça da Oxfam.
And that beautiful sentiment right there is it. There is no democracy. There is no functioning citizenship. There is no basic humanity while there is hunger. Let's look at how Lula achieved, and he did, of course, until the coup of Dilma Rousseff and the reversals. But he took, when he was president, Brazil out of hunger through the Zero Hunger program. It was launched in 2003. It was massively successful in its operation in around 40% of Brazilian communities. Childhood growth stunting was cut in half from 1996 to 2007. It was a comprehensive program. It included helping farmers with modernization, providing credits and subsidies, encouraging them to diversify their crops. It set up programs to allow local organizations like food banks, hospitals, restaurants, and schools to support and purchase food from these farmers at subsidized rates. This is so crucial. It also included investments in roads and infrastructure, and it supported basic forms of cash transfer along with access to schooling. Hunger must be understood as a human-made problem. Direct aid is needed, but also a shift towards a system that changes how and for who we produce food. Lula's poverty and hunger programs took a wide view, understanding you can't address hunger without addressing poverty and how the market fails to prioritize the needs of the poor. This problem is still with us. It's relentless. It's relentless in the United States. It's relentless in the developing world. And of course, it increases everywhere, east, west, north, south, in the main, with the conditions of global pandemic and economic depression. But this is a choice. This is a choice that can be addressed through humane, compassionate, human-centered global policy. Let's do it. Let's demand a zero hunger pledge and a policy in action on all forms of basic poverty in the United States and internationally. And let's reject all those World Bank metrics that would de-emphasize the full magnitude of the problem, even as the actual material conditions stopping us from addressing these problems are very small.
I think it's important to really shout out the approach that Lula's initiative took, because the cash crop issue is something that is a major problem. And the problem is so much more than just like, oh, we're growing the wrong crop. It destroys distribution networks. And that was one thing that was so great about the Lula system, is it's like, yes, there has to be modernization. There has to be different kinds of ships on these like smaller farms. But there also needs to be a creation of pipelines, of roadways to get the food from the farms to communities. But because of modern globalized capitalism, for decades, you have all these farming communities, and the primary goal was to export abroad. So when they, so even if they were to shift the kind of what they were growing, that doesn't have a clear way to get to communities that are in need of it. And just starting to think really, because a lot of people really still don't understand this, like we do have the productive capacity to make sure that we don't have to have hunger. It is a choice. And it's a choice that is not always made by individuals, but it's a sum total of a system that very much puts, the needs of the highest bidder above everyone else. That's what a market system does. So if you can make more money selling coffee to Americans than you can from selling fruits or vegetables to people within your own nation, that's what you want to do, right? And you have to have a kind of system like Lula created and other people have tried to implement that mitigates that counteracts that by using subsidies, by using all these other things. Because without it, we will live in this completely upside down world where we actually have more productive capacity than ever before. But hunger is being reintroduced to communities that haven't experienced hunger in a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't help but think how horrifying it is that we haven't done this already. And you look at like 100 years ago, utopian types of literature. The idea that people would still be so hungry, I mean, it's a major failing of humanity.
Absolutely. And I think there's also a number of other things that we need to look at, and we need to definitely support community-supported agriculture everywhere. That's actually a really, really effective and positive model. We're going to talk more about the landless workers movement in Brazil. There's some very interesting organizations in the United States connecting concepts around reparations with land, basically with food production and distribution. And this can also be connected more broadly with things like, Madragon or Cooperation Jackson, the other side of the central importance of labor organizing, but with people engaging in various kind of cooperative forms of work. I do want to say, I don't want to, open up this whole debate, but this is the other core reason that the whole argument about genetically modified foods, the only thing that was relevant from a public policy perspective was the monopoly power that it gave these enormously dangerous corporations like Monsanto in terms of, literal intellectual property ownership of crops and of seeds. And those are things that need to be completely decommodified and in a commons. And in fact, it's a commons that already exists. A lot of things that we can see in agriculture and biogenetics, and of course, really viciously, we just saw this in Brazil, a move towards privatizing water, or the viciousness of privatization of water in Flint, is this connection between what Marx would say would be primitive accumulation and the basic building blocks of life. And that's core to all of these questions. And it's inseparable ultimately from getting rid of hunger and from protecting global commons, food, seeds, water, air. They have to be for all of us. And they have to be governed democratically.
And I'd just add, I think if capitalism had any intention of solving this problem on its own, it would have solved it in the richest country in the history of the earth. And it shows no intention of doing that.
Absolutely.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.